when I smell a rose, I know the rose by the scent. So where's the scent in the brain?
This is the world's first microprocessor, and I sat down with its inventor to talk about consciousness.
We basically are projecting to the computer what is our property, but is not a property of the computer.
Does it understand what it's doing in the sense that we do?
He says, I'm depressed much of the time.
I'm sorry to hear that you're depressed.
It's not a number. What I feel goes beyond numbers. You see, we go into a domain of existence that goes way beyond what physics has ever studied. And the problem here is that physicists have never worried about consciousness because that's the problem of neuroscientists. Neuroscientists don't know quantum physics, so what the hell? Consciousness is a quantum field. The body is a structure in space and time that is quantum and classical because the cells are made of particles and atoms and molecules that interact quantumly, but they interact quantumly in space and time.
I think Federico managed to, for the first time, give us a satisfying account of this dichotomy, the classical world and the quantum world.
This reality that we call reality, the reality in space-time, is classical. So the body is a bridge between consciousness and this classical world. All I have said so far is what quantum physics is saying. One is the universe, and the universe is dynamic and holistic. So this is just what we already know.
Yeah.
But I add one thing. One wants to know itself. One wants to know itself. So we are fields created by one to know itself.
Thank you very much for watching our channel. We have a book published by the Essentia Foundation called Irreducible, Consciousness, Life, Computers and Human Nature, written by Federico Faggin, sitting here at our table. You are the inventor of the MOS silicon gate technology, the first microprocessor, the touchpad, the touchscreen technology, and neural nets. And you now have written a book about the fundamental nature of consciousness. Very welcome, Federico. It's very nice to have you here. You've spent a week with us in the Netherlands. We've been touring our country with this book, and that content will be shared with you on YouTube. Did you enjoy your week here in the Netherlands?
Very much, even if you guys make me work very hard.
We did, right? We did. Yeah, because we did multiple presentations at universities, a town hall meeting with high school students, everything to promote this book. And that you were up for it with such energy tells me how fired up you are about the message that this book brings. So if I'd ask you, what is the most important message you want to convey to the audience?
That we're not machines, that we are living human beings that have consciousness and free will, which are properties that exist in a reality that is deeper than the space and time reality where our bodies exist. And that capacity to know ourselves resides in that field. The capacity to direct our experience resides in that field. So when we think about us as machines or as computers that will be bested by AI, that is the completely wrong idea about ourselves. We are much more. We have infinitely more capacity, creative capacities than computers. Computers with or without AI.
Yeah, thank you. This is a very thorough investigation in the nature of consciousness. And just to quote Bernardo Kastrup, the director of our foundation, sitting here, and then Bernardo, I'll give you the opportunity to say why you think this is an important book. You say at the beginning, Federico Faggin is probably the most well-rounded idealist alive. He embodies the near-perfect combination of hard-nosed, scientifically informed thought with direct introspective insights into the primacy of consciousness. This book is a true philosophical treasure and in some ways a culmination of Western thought, an absolute must-read. And I know when you say stuff like this, you very often mean it from the heart. So.
I don't say stuff like this. Very, very rare exceptions. I think Federico managed to, for the first time, give us a satisfying account of this dichotomy, the classical world and the quantum world, why that is happening, what does that represent, how the two can be brought together. I think it's the first account that, quite frankly, makes good sense, that gives us that satisfaction that, oh yeah, now I understand why things are weird like this or not. And the essence of it is that what we call quantum states or states of a superposition or, what the wave function describes, they are descriptions of interiority. They are descriptions of experiential states, inner experiential states. That's what they are describing. And the classical world is how that inner experiential state presents itself to external observation. In other words, presents itself to outside measurement. And because information is lost in that transition, what you know from inside and what others can pick out from the outside, it is that obvious transition, that obvious loss of information that leads to the classical world. So the idea that classical physicality, in other words, matter all around us, the contents of perception, the idea that they are symbols of inner experiential states, which are themselves best described as quantum states. It's very satisfying. It brings a form of closure that I find very satisfying.
Yeah, I can understand that from your philosophy because it also helped me to really understand things this week. We talked about a lot of metaphors to understand this. And the one I find beautiful, because this is a book, right? So if the universe is the material universe we perceive, the physical reality we perceive, in your view, is in a sense like a book. It's symbols, it's the universe expressing itself in classical information. But what writes the book is quantum. It's pure consciousness, right?
Yeah, and it is written because the semantics, the meaning of living organism is what drives the symbolic expression. In other words, symbols come from meaning, not the other way around.
Yeah, very clear point. And it sounds almost too good to be true, Bernardo. Can we solve the measurement problem in quantum mechanics and the hard problem in consciousness so easily by just flipping our thought? Because that's what's sort of stuck me when reading this book, that if you take this plausible view very serious, both of them in a sense are solved, or not so deeply mysterious anymore.
Yeah, I think this offers us a very promising, compelling avenue to think about the measurement problem. It's a different way to think about it that I think eventually can lead us to a solution to the measurement problem. Of course, the measurement problem has so many nuances, that have been informed by experiment. And to really solve it, to really make sense, what is the coherence in this framework? Why do things measure up the way they do? That's a long-term goal. But this definitely opens up and offers to us a coherent, self-consistent avenue in terms of which to think about the measurement problem that may get us past certain walls. Yeah. That it's a more promising, much more promising way to think about it.
Yeah, because you'd say a free will decision of consciousness that creates a symbol is the collapse, is sort of
essentially the collapse of the wave function doesn't exist. We have to introduce it to explain why you can go from quantum to classical. But in this other context, it is simply a decision of free will of the fields to communicate whatever symbols appears in space and time, you see. Of course, if you are operating a body, if this field operates a body which straddles the two realities, because our body is quantum classical, so is a bridge between the meaning, the world of meaning and the world of symbols, and it communicates obviously with both worlds, then if consciousness doesn't act, then the body may act, and the consciousness doesn't interfere with the action of the body, then it appears as a decoherence. It appears as something that is reproducible and that can be predicted. But if consciousness intervenes, then it can no longer be predicted because it's not algorithmic. You see, so even these two possibilities are explained within this way of thinking.
Yeah. And ultimately, to be very honest, I don't want to come across as elevating Federico too much. I want to stay within reason. The real problem is to find the right way to think about the problem.
Yeah.
Once you found that, actually solving the problems is almost like you just do the work. You know what I mean? The real challenge is to find the right way to think about it. And I think this offers such an avenue.
Asking the right questions.
Thinking about it the right way. Federico has a history of thinking about things in a completely different way, flipping things around. He did it in technology multiple times, and he's bringing that mind and doing this again.
Beautiful. And this time it took you a lot of, with Moss Silicon Gate, you said it took you 10 days to get the and this one took you 30 years, right, to work this through. And it has, what is beautiful also, it has a personal note, because this is also a deeply human quest you've been on. What I'd like to share with the audience is the sort of the order of the subtitle, which sort of summarizes very well your vision in a certain sense. Consciousness being fundamental, leading to life, an expression of consciousness. And then we are now in the era of computation, which points us back to our true nature, which is not computable, and coming from the inventor of
our
this
human nature
technology.
has both the computer and the living and the consciousness. Actually, all three.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
This book can be ordered on Amazon, and we will be sharing a lot of content with Federico shot in the Netherlands. We're also working on a documentary series about quantum mechanics and consciousness, in which Federico will play a big role. And I'd say this is a must-read. And thank you very much for your time here, Federico. And to end this video, because also Federico has been an earlier hero before you were just an idealist, so to speak, Bernardo, but when you were just building computers, he was already a hero, and now for the second time with this book. So may I ask you, Federico, to this first copy, sign it for Bernardo.
With much pleasure, Bernardo.
With Federico, we were invited at ASML, the largest supplier of the semiconductor industry, to present his new book. Welcome, my name is Hans Busstra, and it's an honor to be standing here. I work for the Essentia Foundation, a foundation that's dedicated to sharing scientific work relevant to analytic idealism, metaphysics, and today we have a hero of the digital age in an arena, I think, that now plays as the center stage. So that I think is very beautiful. Sir Federico Faggin, very much welcome. We've already spent a very nice day here at ASML. And we have this beautiful book that the Essentia Foundation has published, Irreducible, which we will touch upon in an interview, also reflecting back, of course, on all the inventions Federico has made. And I just briefly want to set the stage, so to speak, for this conversation with a couple of slides. My personal background is in filmmaking, and as a documentary filmmaker, ever since I encountered the topic of consciousness related to quantum mechanics in particular, I became obsessed. And I just briefly want to run you through a couple of the ideas that fascinate me. When we look at history from the early days on, the Greeks already not only dreamed about had mythical ideas about creating life, but they really had this idea that it could be done through technology, biotechne. So Hephaestus here making the hero Talos that would walk around on Crete. But they thought it could be done through technology. And if that technology is advanced enough, it becomes indistinguishable from magic. And I think that goes for a lot of what ASML builds as well. When the founding fathers of computing, we already see also thoughts almost having sort of religious undertone. Alan Turing, for instance, said, in attempting to construct such machines, we should not be irreverently usurping his power with a capital H of creating souls any more than we are in the procreation of children. Rather, we are in either case instruments of his will, providing mansions for the soul that he creates. So he basically thought that artificial intelligence, true intelligence, had to invoke some sort of magic because he saw, in a sense, the limitations of his own invention, the Turing machine. And John von Neumann also knew that what they were building would really change the world. I'm thinking about something much more important than the bombs. I'm thinking about computers, building the maniac. And if you now ask artificial intelligence itself what it thinks, the answer is something that I find funny. Yes, of course, the brain produces the mind, because the mind-body problem is at heart what we're talking about here when we think about the possibility of conscious AI. And in philosophy, this is called the heart problem that really became known through the work of David Chalmers. How does the water of the brain turn into the wine of consciousness? And he says materialism is a beautiful and compelling worldview, but to account for consciousness, we have to go beyond the resources it provides. This touches upon a deeper problem in quantum mechanics, of course, the measurement problem. And if we want to have a realistic outlook on life, if there is an objective reality independent of our minds, we get quotes like these from Einstein, who deeply struggled with the implications of quantum mechanics, of course. I like to think the moon is there even if I'm not looking at it, because some of the founding fathers of the theory thought that it could imply that the moon wasn't there in a sense on the, of course, particle scale. We have Max Planck saying, I regard consciousness as fundamental, I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. So these are the founding fathers of quantum mechanics, sort of deeply pondering about the questions the theory posed. And I really like this one by John Wheeler, also an inspiration for Federico Faggin. The universe does not exist out there, independent of us. We are inescapably involved in bringing about that which appears to be happening. We are not only observers, we are participators. In some strange sense, this is a participatory universe. Physics is no longer satisfied with the insights only into particles, fields of force, into geometry, or even time and space. Today, we demand of physics some understanding of existence itself. And in my own journey in investigating all of this, I had the honor of interviewing Sir Roger Penrose, who, of course, is one of the first physicists to explicitly link the deep problem of consciousness, understanding consciousness, with quantum mechanics. And I interviewed him about a chess position he had done. I won't go into the details of it. It basically comes down that he tried to trigger a halting problem in the chess AIs of the day. We also had a question coming in from one of you, so we will touch upon that. And to me, it was a very concrete example of where the human mind still at that time, this is already 7 years ago, could easily defeat sort of the strongest computers at that time. And this also, I think, has been an inspiration to you as well, Federico, the work of Penrose. That brings me to your book, Irreducible, Consciousness, Life, Computers and Human Nature. And please welcome to the stage the inventor of the Silicon Gate technology, the first microprocessor, the touchpad technology, touchscreen technology, and neural nets. Federico Faggin. Welcome. Is the mic working? Yes. Yep. Federico, what's your impression of ASML? We had a nice day here, a tour in the Experience Center.
I need a vacation.
Too much.
I mean, there was so much that goes into one of your machines that is, it's beyond me to see what you have done. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing. Of course, I stopped being in the semiconductor industry in 81. So I follow other avenues after that. And the machines that we had then would be, well, it would be like my first microprocessor compared to, an M3 of Apple or something, one of the today's microprocessors. Mine had 2,300 transistors. And of course, the advanced microprocessors have 50 billion transistors. So,
And you,
same type of problem.
So the question I have is, even though we don't understand consciousness yet, I don't see fundamental objections to the idea of conscious AI. And I'm just curious who thinks that conscious AI, there are no fundamental objections to it. And you can raise your hand if you think it can be done. Okay, I'd say like
lift it higher so that I can get a sense of it.
How much is
so
it, Federico?
All those
50?
people with the hand up think that we can make conscious AI with digital computers, okay?
Okay, it's about 15 to 20%, I'd say.
Yeah.
Okay, nice. See if we can get a number. You want it up or down?
Actually, I was expecting a little higher, but it's good. It means that there are more,
Okay,
there are more intelligent people here than I thought.
Okay. Okay, let's move on to, of course, the real topic of your new book, Irreducible, consciousness. You already told us about synaptics. That got you into neural networking, and it got you into the problem of consciousness. Can you point to the moment that you yourself hit the wall in the sense that you realized, wait a minute, computers cannot be conscious, because that's what you argue.
Yeah.
What was that moment?
Yeah. Well, basically, it was synaptics. I was early on was studying biology and neuroscience because I wanted to do neural networks and I wanted to understand how the brain does the learning and so on. Of course, there were already models, artificial neural networks, but I wanted to go deeper and see if we could do better. And at one point, I remember it was a flash of insight. And I said, well, wait a second, this description of how we, for example, recognize the smell of a flower, they talk about, the molecules emitted by the flower, they go into the nasal epithelium, and there are cells there that recognize the shape of the molecules, and they generate electrical signals. They go to the neural networks of the brain. And the brain can find correlations with that, and they can decide that is a rose or a primula or what have you. So. But when I smell a rose, I know the rose by the scent. So where's the scent in the brain? Where, sure, there are electrical signals in the brain, but what about the scent of the rose? Is that an electrical signal? It cannot be. It must be correlated with that, but it cannot be
Because this is one key point in your book, sort of the age-old philosophical distinction between syntax and semantics, right? And you say computers are about syntax, and the human mind somehow is capable of semantics, meaning.
Yeah, the feeling, the sensations and feelings cannot be equal to the electrical signals of the brain. So I discovered about 7 years before Chalmers wrote this book where talked about the hard problem of consciousness. I discovered it just by asking myself questions. Okay, and in those days, I was also not happy about my life, so I wanted to understand what's wrong, and that was a problem of consciousness too. Feeling good or feeling bad, there may be electrical signals in the brain, but I was feeling the feeling. Where does it come from? And I was, of course, in those days, like today, most scientists thought that consciousness is a phenomenon of the brain. Some say is a phenomenon, some say is an epiphenomenon, which is even less of a phenomenon. Yeah. In other words, is a phenomenon that is not a phenomenon. That's epiphenomenon. And so I wanted to know, and also because it was a personal problem, and I was following the recipe, trying to figure out then how I could make a computer be conscious. So I say, okay, if they are right, computer is a computational device like the brain.
Yeah.
So a computer should be conscious. If the current theory of consciousness is correct, I should be able to program a computer to be conscious.
And I think it's important for people to make the clear distinction between consciousness and intelligence here, because do you believe in artificial intelligence, that it can be intelligent? And how would you sort of make that distinction between intelligence and consciousness?
That's a good question, because I don't think that you can be really intelligent if you're not conscious, because conscious is what allows us to know, but not just to know through the sensations and feelings, what Chalmers call qualia.
Yeah.
In other words, we know because we feel. And what we know then becomes a comprehension. No, we understand what something means that goes beyond qualia. It goes beyond sensations and feelings.
Yeah.
Sensations and feelings are the way we know, but then we know beyond the sensations and feelings by thinking about it. The thought is a process of consciousness and the brain, but mostly consciousness. And so when we get the meaning of what we feel, that meaning goes way beyond what qualia are, never mind the electrical signals. And computers can only go to the electrical signals, and so they cannot have any feelings, they cannot have any true understanding, because that requires consciousness.
You would say that if we sort of think they are intelligent, artificial intelligence is truly intelligence, we are sort of making that mistake, that quote from Arthur C. Clarke I started with, that it's indistinguishable from magic. So we apply magic to something that is just pattern recognition and lots of experience, but still no understanding.
Yeah, we basically are projecting to the computer what is our property, but is not a property of the computer.
Why do we do that, you think? Is that sort of mere fantasy?
We do that because we are used to think that if somebody, behaves in what appear as an intelligent way, imitates us, it must be like us, so have a consciousness. But if I say I love you to my son, when I say that, and I'm honest, I say that because I feel love. If a computer tells me I love you, do I believe that it feels anything for me? It doesn't feel anything. It basically responds to a face recognition where I may make a smile. It can recognize this smile as a pattern, but not the meaning of the smile. But it is wired inside to then say, I love you. But there is nothing in between. When I see a child and I feel love for the child, I see the child. It goes into my brain. The brain recognizes the child. My consciousness, which is not in the brain, because we got to get there eventually, in the discussion. So it is not in the brain. My consciousness feels love because it translates that smile as a pattern of information into a feeling of love. And the feeling of love is what I then respond to by saying something.
Of course, now we're moving into the nuts and bolts of your theory. I think good to mention that when you say all this about consciousness, that the problem, of course, is that we don't have a test, right? We don't have a Turing test for consciousness. There's no way to establish it. It is a private inner experience that cannot be established from the outside. That makes this whole topic, of course, difficult. You agree there, right?
Well, absolutely. Yeah. The problem is that I cannot transfer to anybody what I feel. What I feel is private. What you feel is private. You cannot transfer it to me. In order to tell you what I feel, must translate that private feeling into classical information, bits.
Symbols.
What I say, symbols. And the symbols must be, they must be shareable. They must be copyable. To share, you need to copy.
Yeah.
Okay? My inner experience cannot be copied. And there is something in physics that cannot be copied.
Quantum state.
Quantum state. A quantum state, there is the no cloning theorem that says, cannot copy. Not only that, but the maximum information that you can get if you make a measurement of a quantum state is 1 bit per quantum bit. Olivo's theorem. Olivo's theorem says that, and we have Olivo's theorem ourselves. What I can say about what I feel is much, much less than what I feel. When I say to my son, I love you, is I love you what I feel? Not even close. What I feel is as depth, as dimensions that I cannot even probe myself. It's dynamic. It's not a number. It's not a bunch of bits. What I feel goes beyond numbers. You see, we go into a domain of existence that goes way beyond what physics has ever studied. And the problem here is that physicists have never worried about consciousness because that's the problem of neuroscientists. Neuroscientists don't know quantum physics, so what the hell? Then, there is a hole in the middle, right? The program and the data of a computer, no matter how complex it is, can be copied as much as you want. Those are numbers. Our experience has the properties of a quantum state that does not, a quantum state does not exist in space and time. It can only be described in Hilbert space, n-dimensional spaces with dimensions which are complex numbers, not even real numbers, complex numbers. That's why, and in this theory, clearly, the quantum state is the representation of qualia. So in this is a theory now. I will describe it a little bit later, more precisely, but it's precise enough right now. Qualia are represented by quantum information, a quantum state, quantum information. A quantum information cannot be reproduced by a computer. So because the quantum state cannot be represented in space and time, it is a property of a field, because in Hilbert space there is no matter, nothing. The matter are states of fields, excited states of fields. If you study quantum physics, you know that an electron is not a little ball, and it's not even a particle, it's not even an object. It is a state of a field. The state of a field of electrons. It is an excited state because it appears in space and time. But the quantum fields can only be described, and its state can only be described in Hilbert space, which is a deeper reality, if you believe that to be reality, or it is a mathematical abstractions. But now we had to go beyond the mathematical abstraction because there are quantum computers that can operate. They give you a solution. So where is the operation of the quantum computers? Could it be in an abstract mathematical field? Of course not. So there has to be a reality, deeper reality, out of which this space-time reality that we call reality emerges. So therefore think of the model in the following way. Consciousness is a quantum field. The body is a structure in space and time that is quantum and classical, because the cells are made of particles and atoms and molecules that interact quantumly, but they interact quantumly in space and time, and also in Hilbert space. It can exist in both areas, in both fields, and this reality that we call reality, the reality in space-time, is classical. So the body is a bridge between consciousness and this classical world. And the consciousness is the one that controls the body, just like we control a drone. We control a drone, the drone gives us information from where it is, and it's semi-autonomous, like our body is, and we can control the drone by the body. So now, the body, if we go into us, then the one that controls the drone is our conscious field. That's who we are, really, and the body is a drone, and the drone reports to the conscious field this reality by taking what is here through the sensory system and the brain and creating quantum states inside the cells, which are read by the quantum fields. See, that's the right model to think about what consciousness is. So consciousness is a field that has consciousness and free will. We'll get to the free will later.
But first, very interesting to get, this is mind-bending stuff. I think even for very smart people sitting here, still mind-bending stuff. What helped me in trying to understand it is, of course, the famous movie The Matrix, but then, of course, simulation would not be done by computers, but it would be consciousness itself, right? It's the quantum fields.
Matrix is classical, so that is...
Yeah, of course, but the metaphor is of living in a dashboard reality in space-time, done by computers, but if we would put off the headset, it would be like pure consciousness. So you are also claiming outlandish stuff, according to some people, that consciousness is not your body. Consciousness...
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
So, that's a good news, actually, if you believe me, because if you believe to be a body, then when the body dies, goodbye, guys, there is nothing left of you. But if you believe what I'm saying, then the body dies, you don't go anywhere. You're still in that deeper reality in which the quantum field that you are exists. So that's what this means.
Very curious what the questions are here, but a common critique when consciousness is related to quantum mechanics is, of course, we don't understand consciousness, we don't understand the quantum weirdness, so therefore they must be related. That's a critique people have. What's your response to that?
It's very easy to solve. You turn it around, just like making silicon gate.
All right. And then quantum isn't weird and consciousness isn't weird
you turn
either.
it around, you say, you must start with consciousness and free will as postulates. They must exist. They cannot be defined with any simpler way than themselves. Think about it. Not only that, but this postulate, contrary to the postulates of quantum physics, this postulate is self-evident. Why? Because each one of you knows within that you have consciousness, and you also know that you have some level of free will. So you already know, self-evident. You start with a self-evident postulate.
This is Descartes, right? And
now that's the theory that the real theory that can be tested, and that I have developed together with Giacomo Mauro D'Ariano, which is a world authority in quantum information. And so if you start this way, you can explain why quantum physics has the crazy properties that no physicists have been able to understand. So in other words, because you're conscious, that the stuff that you're conscious, the most critical stuff that you're conscious, qualia, must have a mathematical representation that has those properties. The quantum state. The quantum state has exactly the properties of your consciousness.
It's not
non-reproducible, and you can only know 1 bit per quantum bit. From the outside, even myself, I cannot give it even the owner of that state cannot reproduce it. Never mind measuring it. If you measure it,
If I want to share it, my private inner life, my conscious experience,
you have to use shareable systems.
So I have to collapse.
You have to use classical information.
Collapse the wave function within, so to speak, to a particle, which would be a symbol a word that I would then exchange with you.
And the collapse of the wave function, now that you mention, that's a decision of free will of the field.
Of the field.
Of the field, the conscious field, right? I mean, what else? How can you have free will if you're not conscious? Just think about it. You cannot, free will means that you know what you want, and you have a sense of of the reality in which you are, so that you can act with free will. So consciousness is absolutely necessary to have free will. Since physicists have never considered consciousness a property of quantum fields, they say that the collapse of the wave function requires two things. Requires randomness, a random decision, a random event, and that random event cannot be algorithmic. So it's a non-algorithmic event, exactly what a free will decision is. So now that we have defined consciousness as a quantum state, as a property of the qualia as a property, as quantum state, now automatically, because the field is consciousness, that random non-algorithmic event is a decision of the quantum field that is conscious.
And here,
because the two must come together.
And where do you link with Roger Penrose? He would sort of not follow you all this way, but he would say, I cannot account for phenomena of mind that seem to be non-algorithmic, like the solving of that chapter on true creativity.
Roger got to the point of saying, consciousness somehow is connected with non-algorithmic, something non-algorithmic.
And the only phenomenon in nature that we know of that is non-algorithmic has to be quantum. Is that?
Say it again.
The only phenomenon in nature that we know of that is non-algorithmic, or then we have to go quantum. That's sort of it
is the collapse of the wave function.
Yes, okay.
And so now, with knowing that there is consciousness, if we start with consciousness, then that event is a free will event. You see?
Yeah, very curious of what is being said. Sort of rings a bell, or just raises a lot of questions. I see a question there in the back. Let's see if is the bubble box working again? Nee. Oh, you have a handout. Misschien Jens, dat jij...
Hello?
Hello?
Oh.
Is there a button?
Yeah, there you are. Yeah, the black button.
There's a button somewhere.
Yeah.
So the question is, are emotions necessary to get consciousness, or are the emotions product of consciousness?
No, the emotions are states that you're conscious of. So that, if you have consciousness, then you can have emotions. But if you're not conscious, you cannot have emotions. Emotions are really qualia. So a computer does not have any emotion because it cannot have any qualia. Qualia are quantum states. They don't exist in space and time. They are not bits. They are not numbers.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I had a question. It sounds really stupid when I even think about it, but I'll just ask it. What about a person who is brain dead?
Yeah.
What happened to so what happens to the physical and the consciousness if you say they are connected but not really, the bridge, the body is the bridge.
Yeah.
So
it's fine. It's a good question. So there are hundreds of thousands of people that have an experience when their brain is dead for a while. For example, cardiac arrest. After cardiac arrest, 20, 30 seconds later, the brain there's no electrical activity anymore. These people come to the hospital. They are operated and they are resuscitated, so to speak, because they were clinically dead when they arrive. And they report, many of them report having had an extraordinary experience of consciousness. First of all, they see themselves they see themselves in the ceiling of the operating room. They see their body being operated, and they report what they saw, which was exactly what happened. Then they move into another area, another space, where they meet people that were dead, parents, perhaps friends. They have a great feeling of love, joy, peace. They feel at home. Then they are told that they have to go back because they haven't finished what they were on earth to do. And they wake up in the post-operating room. As I said, hundreds of thousands of people have this experience. How is it possible that they can have such an experience which later reveals itself as transformative? At least 90% of the time of the cases are transformative. The person is transformed by that experience because that experience reveals a deep aspect of selves that those people didn't know existed, and they are transformed. So how is that possible if consciousness is a property of the brain? Those should not be possible. Science right now prefers to ignore scientists because science with the capital S does not. And besides, science with the capital S is not even a person. But scientists now ignore that stuff. They don't want to talk about it because for all kinds of reasons. But those events happen. I have been transformed myself by a similar experience, not a near-death experience, but one that said that I was both the observer and the observed. My consciousness was not only in my body, but it was also in what I was observing. And what I was observing was a field of white scintillating light. There was a love, joy, and peace that I never felt in my life before. I could not have imagined this experience without having one. So how is that possible? And that's why I study consciousness. This happened in 1990 when I was unhappy about myself and I wanted to understand what consciousness is. Well, someone answered that question and gave me that experience. And that experience changed my idea of what I was, because before I was like everybody else that studied physics or science. I thought I was a machine. I thought that I was a body. But I wanted to understand. And I actually put 2 or 3 years of work, not maybe only 10% of my time, trying to understand how to make a computer conscious. So I was not just accepting what the scientists were saying, but saying, well, if they are right, let me prove it.
Exactly.
And I couldn't even come close to understanding how can I take electrical signals and make qualia out of electrical signals. It was impossible. And nobody, of course, has done it since. So.
And what I like about your book or theory is that you are honest about the fact that, of course, in a sense, it's speculative, but we need to, if we want to progress this hard problem, because we've been pondering it for how many years? I mean, the interpretation of quantum mechanics, it's like a...
Actually,
Thanks. It's a glass of water, if you'd like.
Thank
this.
you.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Our ancestors knew better, because only in the last 200 years have we abandoned the idea that there is something that survives death. The death of the body, okay? Yeah. Only the last 200 years.
Yeah.
Science has grown to the point where they think they know everything, and they have forgotten that they might not know something about what they cannot test.
Yeah.
But in fact, just the no cloning theorem is about 30 years old. Everybody thought that you can test everything. The physicists, saw that now they cannot reproduce in the laboratory a quantum state. So stop telling me that something is real only if you can reproduce it in the lab and make a measurement. Yeah. They discovered that is impossible.
Yeah.
So why, there is more,
like that we
more,
cannot, yeah.
more to,
yeah.
what is it, this famous forget it.
Try
to remember a quote.
Yeah, I agree. And Federico, what I find nice about your book, that just dawned on me today, is that in the order of the subtitle of your book, it says consciousness, life, computers, human nature. And I was wondering, hey, what's the order there? So we have life, then we have computers emerging as sort of evolution.
That's right.
And they are pointing us now to who we truly are. Is that what you're trying to communicate?
That's correct, yeah. And what already since the Vedas, which are the first written account of human nature at the deep level, at least 3,500 years ago, 3,500 years ago, they knew that consciousness was fundamental. They also knew that consciousness was a property of one, the totality of what exists. And is exactly now, is the essence, the starting point of the theory of consciousness that I quickly explained earlier.
Yeah.
So essentially one, the totality of what exists in this new theory is dynamic, means is never the same instant after instant, is holistic. It simply means it is not made of separable parts. Everything is connected within one. All I have said so far is what quantum physics is saying. One is the universe, and the universe is dynamic and holistic. So this is just what we already know.
Yeah.
But I add one thing. One wants to know itself. One wants to know itself.
The universe wants to know itself.
Yeah. And that adds the interiority to nature that science has eliminated by fiat. They have said there is no interiority. Consciousness is an epiphenomenon of the brain, eliminated from life, from everything. What is the most precious thing that we have? Our humanity, our capacity to understand, to comprehend, to have meaning. The meaning of life is completely thrown out the door by starting on the wrong foot. That's all. So let's start with the right foot, where we start already with the idea that the universe wants to do exactly what we want to do, which is to know ourselves. You think about it. The deepest urge that you feel is to know yourself. When when you're done kidding and you really have 40 or 50 years and you start thinking about what is my life, what have I done, etc., etc. When you are young, it's too early, but eventually you get there, and then you ask yourself, what is it that I want? You want to know who you are. What am I here for? What is life for? What is the universe? Those questions man always has asked himself. So,
yeah. And I think it's beautiful in that sense that you bring together those intuitions, those pre-modern intuitions that quantum theory does seem to sort of give credence to, and now bring sort of an analytic mindset to that, because you've mentioned the word theory a lot of times. How can we test this?
So if we now take this as a postulate, it has to be taken as a postulate. It means that for one wants to know itself implies two things. One, the wanting implies free will. And to know itself, one must be conscious, because conscious is what allows you to know. So there you are. Now consciousness and free will they are the beginning of reality starts with one that wants to know itself, that has consciousness and free will. But now with this postulate, we can explain quantum physics. It could not be explained before. Now we understand why there has to be an inner reality, which is made of qualia, and an outer reality, which is made of what? Of symbols, shareable symbols, what we call matter. They are shareable symbols that we use to communicate what we feel. So the evolution of life is a cycles of communications where from meaning to symbols, from symbols to meaning, from meaning to symbol and through this process we know ourselves. So we are fields created by one to know itself. And when you start there, then you have continuity from the beginning. You haven't thrown away the reason for you.
How can your theory lead to breakthrough technologies?
Why should it need to break through technology? I think this theory needs to better people, people that can live together better, they have more fun, they can know themselves. Technology, great. I mean, technology can continue, but we better think about who we are. And especially this technology will allow people to see that the purpose of life is not the survival of the fittest, but it is to cooperate together to know each other. And that is what we have ahead of us. If we want to have a better planet, we better learn how to cooperate instead of competing.
Thank you so much. Yeah.